Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Cerna Podcast Live, episode 5, where we talk about the ServiceNow Customization Cliff and how to keep from going over. I am joined once again by my distinguished panel. Almost everyone here I think we've had on the podcast before, but let's introduce ourselves. Why don't you just let us know what is your name, what is your title with Cerna Solutions, and what part of the country are you in? And we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, so Will Smith, not that one. I am the technical consultant at Cerna Solutions, and I'm in Ohio.
All right, Tanner.
Alrighty, I'm Tanner Kibler. I'm a consultant as well with Cerna Solutions. I am located in Tennessee.
Very nice. Carrie, are you with us? How's your internet?
Yes. Yeah. So despite having terrible internet, I am still Carrie. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a senior technical consultant with Cerna Solutions.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we did this topic really out of a high demand. When we had done our podcast last month about scary ServiceNow problems, we asked everyone to insert their own scary problems that they're dealing with. And a huge majority of people let us know that they're having problems with customization and going back to box. And so we thought that this was going to be a great opportunity for us to bring our experts in to talk about this, how we approach this. Something to keep in mind, obviously, this is a unique situation for every company. So we can't give you a perfect formula for what you can do at your exact company on how to fix this problem or how to create a strategy for yourselves. But we're going to do our best to create a framework for you, how to give you some best practices, both from a process end as well as a little bit on the technical end. Feel free to ask questions throughout this webinar. We do have the panel on there for you to go ahead and either don't raise your hand, I won't call on you, but feel free to just enter that question right in there, and we will usually try to either get to them at the end of the podcast, or if it's relevant to what we're talking about now, I'll try to grab it now and throw that in there as well. A question that a lot of people ask, someone was asking, where's Jeff? Jeff's not on this one, but he's...
Rude. We're here.
He's on many of them.
You don't need that guy.
Hard not to take that personal, guys.
I know. It's fine.
But another question a lot of people ask is, will this be recorded? This is a podcast. This will be recorded. We do put this on our YouTube page. We do have it on our Cerna Solutions website, cernasolutions.com, under the resources tab, where we have all of our podcasts and webinars. If you like this, definitely go there and see if there's another topic that you like, that you want to learn a little bit more about. And the best way to keep in touch with us is on our LinkedIn page. If you go to LinkedIn and follow us, we post about different activities that we're doing all the time there. So what I want to do is let's talk real quickly about what are we going to talk about. First thing we want to do is we want to define what customization really means. Surprisingly, it's interesting to see how many people have a different perspective on what customization really means. I think that was one of the first things we realized when we had this conversation internally. We're going to talk about what are the potential negatives of over-customizing. Customizing is great. You will not always get a negative. Customizing is one of the reasons why people use ServiceNow. But you can reach a point where it's too much, and you are going to need to manage around that. When should you customize versus when should you stay out of box? I think that's definitely a tricky subject for a lot of people, especially when you don't know what out of box is going to mean next year. Are you going to have that functionality that you want now next year, but you already built your own solution for it? And then finally, we're actually going to give you some strategies, as I mentioned, both on a process side as well as on a more technical side, kind of a cheat sheet for yourself, how to create a plan of going back to box. Once you've decided you've gone over that cliff, what should you do about it? So first and foremost, let's talk about defining ServiceNow customization. Guys, what does this mean to you?
To me, customization is making, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Making modifications to core parts of the platform. And there is always some gray zone there. But, even if something sometimes looks like configuration, which we'll define configuration as well. Configuration is using the platform essentially as it's designed with, some tweaks here and there. But sometimes configuration can also look like customization, so just be careful. And we've later on, not right now, but at the end of this, we'll have an example of that too. But to me, customization is modifying parts of the platform, tweaking code to make your solution work.
The way I define it is would someone have to have specific knowledge of what's built here to come in and fix something if it wasn't working? Or could any ServiceNow technical resource come in and look at this and understand quickly, how to resolve it? The more custom you get, the more challenging it is to, understand what you've built and fix it if it needs to be fixed. So, yeah. Will, what do you think?
So yeah, I mean, I would say that customization is, it's a little bit different than configuration, and it's a little bit not as technical usually.
So what about, I know that some people believe that, and this is actually a question that just came in as well. A lot of people think of a customization as anything that is a change to the ServiceNow files. Is that a broad enough perspective on customization, or is that too broad for the conversation we're having right now?
I think that's perfectly broad, and a change to the file actually is going to be, just the right amount of broad. No, a change to the file would be one of our customization, no-nos later on in this. That's actually probably a good way to define it for this meeting.
Okay, well, let's take a look real quick. I mean, when we, Will, when you were talking about how customization can be at a configuration level, can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so at the configuration level, you've got customization versus kind of configuration. So to me, customization is, you tweak something with a UI that usually doesn't involve code, whereas, with a configuration, you're usually touching things that are deeper in the system, and things that are not. Sorry, I kind of losing my words here.
Is that flipped? Do you mean
yes,
configurations?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. So configuration is code level, and customization is like the workflows that we have here.
Yeah, Tanner, can you explain this a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this workflow, I spoke earlier about how sometimes using the platform as it was designed to be used, aka configuration, can actually give you the same problems as customization. And as one of our helpful question askers posed the question earlier of would you consider a change to an application file to be a customization? That's why this causes you problems. Let's look at this workflow. This is an out-of-the-box workflow for change that I pulled from a PDI, so I know it has never been modified. And I added an if condition and an approval record. Very small. That's very minor. No one would really, if doing the work, would say, I've gone too far. No one would look at that and say, what have I done? I've ruined things. I've gone way too far with this. But it has the same problems as a larger scale customization. You've modified that file. To use our broad definition, you've modified that file. At upgrade time, you're now going to have to pay attention to this because it's going to get skipped for upgrade because you've modified that file. If you have to change this process later, you're going to have to remember what you modified because you modified that file. So any further changes, you've just increased your technical debt, and you've got to keep your developers informed of what it was. Obviously, this is an incredibly basic example to show that, but it's a good example still of when a configuration can give you the same problems as a customization. You did this using the platform in its design use case, but it could still cause problems.
Tanner, will you tell me what technical debt means? Yeah, when you say technical debt, what do you mean by that?
Technical debt, to me, is any increase in code base or knowledge needed to bring on new developers.
That's fair. Yeah, so someone would have to know how this is built to easily support it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that is a great segue into our next topic right now. I mean, even if you have a small, a really basic workflow with a really small change to it, as you pointed out, and actually a few other people had commented in the questions, anything that causes an object to get skipped during an upgrade, that's obviously going to cause problems if you rely on that and you didn't do the due diligence to go back and make that, to upgrade with that object, to make sure that upgrade works with your customizations. So let's talk, what else are you guys seeing right now in terms of over customizing? What are some of the problems that we've all seen for, in our real world examples of what that looks like?
Well, you're always going to have issues at upgrade time. You're going to have issues or increased time required to potentially debug any issues discovered within the process that you've customized. And you also lose the ability to say, this is out of the box. This bug exists in the platform and it's a high ticket, and we're not going to spend our own hours, our own development time updating it. We're going to put it in a high ticket. You can't say that anymore because it could very well be with what you've changed. So now you've got increased time support for it as well.
Right. I mean, the beauty of staying out of the box is that more people understand how that works. More people could come in and support it. It's simpler generally for your users to use things that are in the box because they can be easily supported by a team that has minimal knowledge of ServiceNow.
Yeah, it helps your admins, right? So if you do something that without code, if you can do something and not code it and use a UI to do it, I totally recommend doing it, through the UI and going with the no code or the low code approach, just because it's less moving parts and it's less pieces that could break, and it's also better on your admins, so they can.
Which is not to say don't customize. I mean, like Tim said, that is the beauty of ServiceNow, is that you can customize it. Just we are advocating for doing that in a smart way, so that you think about all of the potential downsides and sort of try to avoid some of these pitfalls, and then end up at the end with a happy medium.
Now, yeah, I think that's a great point that you're touching on in terms of why people like to use ServiceNow. I think ServiceNow, we've all seen, they're upgrading so much that they really are trying to be the most useful out of the box solution as they possibly can. And they're chasing this unattainable goal of being the perfect one size fits all solution for every size of and every need of company, which is obviously impossible. That's why customizing is so important. But what have you guys seen in terms of once you've created something that is not supported, once you've created something that you need to support on your own, what are kind of the pitfalls there? What are the downsides for a company of having to do that on their own?
Well, first of all, it's really hard to reach out to ServiceNow for support on something that's a custom process, because once they, look at it and they're like, wow, you've customized this so much that we can't really tell you how to fix this. It just makes it more challenging to work with someone who just works with out of the box all the time.
What about in terms of like automated testing? I know that, a lot of people are trying to do automated testing more and more. And once they've kind of created their own custom process, does that still work? Are you still able to use, an out of the box automated tester to test something that you customized yourself?
I would say no, not with a high degree of certainty. If you build a custom process or you build an integration, and then you want to try to test an integration, that's not something that you can test with ServiceNow's out-of-box solution.
You'd have to also customize your tester.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Well, take a nice long sip there, Tanner. That's fine.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Well, no, going back to the question of, you've got an automated test script, you can't use it anymore. Well, you've modified the code that it's testing. So if you want to ensure that you still have accurate test results, you're going to have to also modify whatever tester you were using.
Right.
Your test scripts.
You have to update your use cases and your test cases. Yep.
Now, someone wrote in and brought up how, IPCC, the general ITSM processes, that's something that many people already, do a fair job of understanding. What about in terms of CAT processes? How does that work with, with this perspective?
Which processes again?
CAT.
I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh no, did I cut out? Can you guys hear me? Oh no.
Did you say
Yes.
CAT processes?
Yes, I did.
CAT processes.
Would you care to
Catalog.
define a CAT process?
Sorry, catalog processes. They just
Catalog processes. Okay.
Referring.
he capitalized CAT,
Things,
so I thought I'd read it the way,
No.
and I thought you guys would know what it meant. Sorry.
We know nothing. Yeah.
It was a technical glitch. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Oh, we're good. I was running through so many things in my head. Like, what
Right?
could it be?
What?
That means we're sorry.
Okay. So
So the discussion of what the acronym was threw me off the question. So what was the question?
Sure.
Catalog?
So the verbatim what was written, more people need to understand IPCC out-of-box processes and adhere to them, but catalog processes are a different animal. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's not wrong to say that. And I think
Yeah.
that what I've seen most often in terms of customization within a catalog process is what I have seen done is people have used the catalog to do some very, very specific things for each item. So let's say you had a requested item and you were checking for, I don't know, AD permissions for a user. That's going to be a workflow that runs for this requested item. It's what I've seen someone do before.
Mm.
It's going to be a customization. That's something that you have to write and maintain, and it's going to cause you potentially problems down the road with testing as well. But I know that's a really abstract example, but I've seen that exact thing happen. You take a very, very, very specific use case, and you wind up with, a workflow for each very specific use case, and now you get 50 workflows in your catalog, and it's this gigantic catalog to maintain.
Well, I think that brings us, right again to our next point in terms of, if we're saying that customization isn't bad, and I'm getting notes from people in the questions throughout saying that it's absolutely essential for a number of different functions that ServiceNow has. When is it great to customize? When is it a good idea? And where do you guys draw the line for when to absolutely stay as close to out of the box as possible?
Well, one thing I want to say just about the catalog, since we were talking about that, like that, you cannot use the catalog module out of the box. I mean, you can't request anything unless you have created items to request. You can't send those requests to people who are going to approve them unless you have created those workflows. So like that is meant for you to customize. So do not think that we are trying to say don't ever customize any of that. I think that's where one area where you kind of need to build your own framework. And so like Tanner was saying, is if you have this catalog that has a bajillion items in them and they all have that separate workflows, maybe you need to sort of implement your own framework there where you standardize some of those things that you're building and follow the same procedures, even, with variable sets and everything to keep the fields the same that people fill in so that you can reuse some of those, and then people can come in, look at one of those items and know how to support all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With the hope being that you'd have 75 to 80% of your items using a standard workflow.
Standardized, exactly.
But I mean, what in terms of drawing that line though, where are there applications that you feel are best to stay out of box, or are there times where a customer says, I would like to customize this, and you would absolutely say, I do not recommend that?
So I would say for the ITIL based processes, probably best to stay out of box on those. As close to out of box as you can, right? But if I'm going to come back to my integration example. With an integration, right? I mean, those are highly technical and is going to require customization, right? We know that there are things that you have to customize, and like we've said, we're certainly not advocating for totally out of the box. That's not real world. But when it does come to customization versus configuration, you can hopefully get away with most of the ITIL based processes, with little customization, or at least a no code approach. Tanner, what are your thoughts?
I would have to agree with you. So what I would recommend, if anyone asked me what processes were safe to customize, I would say, they're all safe
Mm-hmm.
to customize in the same degree, right? There is no one process that I would absolutely say, no, never, ever in a bajillion years touch that, right? But I would advise that they all be approached with the same level of caution and the same level of planning whenever you're customizing. That's the key. I'm not saying don't customize. Yeah, I'm not saying don't customize. I'm saying do it well, right?
Yeah,
that's the key.
Do it smartly.
So there's not one that you should just never touch, but you should do them all well. I know everyone on the call is like, of course you should do a good job.
Right? Yeah. Don't screw this up, people.
But that really is it. Yeah.
Hey, Carrie, I saw at some point you started to speak, and then I think your audio cut out there. Do you want to weigh in?
No, my internet decided that what I was going to say was not relevant, so it's okay. I'm pretty sure it was already said by other folks.
Well, let's move on. Let's talk about what are some real world scenarios for this. I think specifically one of the biggest questions that people had, both on the questionnaire that we put out in last month's podcast, as well as the question that we attached to this month's podcast, was how do you go back to box once you've decided that your customization is gone haywire? What do you do to bring it back to where it was?
So I have one that I wrote down that I was going to bring up in this meeting.
Go for it.
In this webinar.
I think this is a good time to bring that up. Go ahead.
I think so too. Okay, so you have a client who has a change process, and then within that change process is a sub-change process. This is only being used by one department. It's completely different from the change process, but it's sort of attached to their change process. So only one department is using it. There's a ton of customization. Somebody came in and was just like, we are going to customize the heck out of this. And as a result, that guy left the company. No one knows how to support this thing. You are being brought in to determine whether you can simplify it or roll it back to out of the box. What do you do? What steps would you take from there?
Let's throw it to you.
Will, do you want to take it? Yeah.
I would say that, preparation, obviously, like Tanner said, preparation is key. So you want to, take some time to get your mind around what was actually done, what's the full scope of, what we're working here, how in-depth is it, and, that kind of thing, as well as, just looking at the workflows, bringing in the, key stakeholders to see if they can give you some background or some context, because again, the person left, so you don't have a lot of context to go off of.
Yeah.
But I would say those would be kind of the two key areas where I would start is, take some time to look at the breadth of the problem and then bring in, key resources that can help you come up to speed quickly.
Right. Like you need to understand it before you can make any changes to it, really. You need to try to understand what it's doing. Tanner, what do you think?
I completely agree. Preparation is my favorite word for this topic. Have all of your ducks in a row before you touch the first line of code.
Yeah.
If you don't understand what you're changing, you're going to be implementing issues for yourself in 6 months.
Yeah. Also the requirements, right? You have to talk to the people who are using this and really know what they need out of this before you try to make it a different process.
Well, let me ask you guys, why do our customers tend to genuflect every time they ask us about reimplementation? It seems like they're genuflect. They're always so worried when they talk about.
Okay.
What does he mean by that? Okay. Yes.
It's a perfectly prominent word, you guys.
Freak out. No, it is. You're embiggening my vocabulary as we speak.
So, why do people seem so afraid? Why do they seem to, when they say reimplementation, why is it such a dirty word? Why is it so scary for customers?
Oh, God. I think just, they've invested a lot of time and effort into building what they have now. They have a company that is at least somewhat happy with what, it's working in some way, probably. And I think that the fear is just that we're going to lose all of the things that work. We're going to have to deal with a lot of angry users who now have to learn a new process.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary for anybody. Like people hate change. Change is the worst.
Yeah.
So
people are inherently change averse.
yeah.
And that's at every level of management, at every level of every user. People hate change. If they're used to doing something for the last 6 months and it isn't completely 100% broken,
yeah,
they're gonna do the genuflex.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that word 3 more times today so I remember it.
Oh no.
Write it over your word a day calendar, whatever it is today.
Yeah.
Nice. Get a
So,
tattoo of it.
What types of customizations are likely to break during an upgrade? Is it every single customization, or are there others that are more likely than others? Excuse me.
That's tough because it's so very situational.
Yeah.
It's situational in the process that's been customized. It's situational in the versions of ServiceNow that you're moving from and to, and how many versions you're skipping. That's a very situational question.
It
So
really
all I
depends
can
on.
say,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
well, no, I was going to say, how much code is involved would be the only, center to that conversation I could speak to without any other context.
Yeah, that's a good
How much code?
Oh, is that
So
well?
the taller the tower, the more likely it is to fall down, right? I mean, it's it's funny. We got a question that I feel obliged to pose to the group simply because it's kind of a plug for us. Someone had brought up one of our products, Capio, in terms of how is testing customization with Capio versus with ATF, and that is actually something that we do. We have, for those that don't know, Cerna Solutions has a automated testing solution called Capio, which is specifically designed for ServiceNow, and that is actually a feature that we built into it, is being able to be future-proof. That whatever customizations you have, whatever you've built in ServiceNow, it's if it works in what are we on, London now, and we go to Madrid and New York, it's still going to work in Zurich without the same level of having to go back and maintain your code the way you would if you built that yourself in almost any other automated testing system. So sorry for the plug. I felt the need to bring that up since someone asked.
No, it's good. Capio is cool. You guys should know about it.
It's true.
Cool.
Since we're talking about scenarios, Will, someone had asked us about is Service Portal in the same boat? Is it a different beast? Are Service Portal customizations? What do you need to know there in terms of, or what is a real world example of a Service Portal customization that may lead you towards the cliff?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm not in Hawaii. I'm no Jeff, but I would say that a Service Portal customization that can definitely get you started down walking towards off the cliff would be widgets are the first thing that come to mind, where you can just build widget after widget after widget, and you can have widgets that interact with other widgets, and so the customizations there are literally endless, which is really good. But it can also be kind of bad too, right? I mean, you just want to be careful with how you build your widgets and make sure that they work well together, right? That they're modular too, right? So you make it so that they can do a couple of things and then just stop. Don't make 16,000 widgets.
Yeah.
And document what you have done, for the love of Pete.
Yes, please.
Help us
Documentation,
out.
that's always the last thing people think of, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
Well, and it helps your future self, right? So help your future self, help your future coworkers,
your future colleagues. Yeah.
If Carrie has to come into a project that I worked on,
no.
Exactly what to do. But yeah, just help your future selves, right?
Yeah.
Write some documentation. Even if it's just kind of high level of, here's the pieces of the platform that I modified, and a 2-line of what I changed. Doesn't have to be crazy technical. Tanner.
Yes, Tanner.
No, I was just going to point out, before we left the Service Portal conversation entirely, I had one thing to note there to supplement what Will said. when it comes to widgets, they are designed to be picked up and dropped on whatever page you want, right? They should take a page out of the Linux handbook and do one thing and do it really well, and just always do just that one thing.
Right.
Simplify as much as possible. And if you do that, think about the framework of the widget. What do you have? You've got server side, client side, HTML. Of course, you've got some Angular templates and stuff if you want to. Think about what happens if ServiceNow upgrades. They're not going to modify the core functionality. They're not going to modify translating your data from server side to client side. That's never going to change. So if you have a widget that does one thing and does it really well, and it isn't super complex, and it uses the platform as designed in that framework, you'll never have any issues out of that widget.
Yeah.
Great point.
Also, make copies, and don't modify the originals, please.
Yeah.
Gary's working ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just, while we're talking about it, make a note.
Yeah. Well, and we're
Always
going to
make a
go into some
copy.
best practices there as well. But
Yeah.
I feel the need to do 2 more pitches, guys. I wouldn't be doing my job if I don't pitch a couple of Cerna solutions for these.
For a commercial break.
So when we talk about documentation, if that's something your company is struggling with, is documentation, talk to us about CernaDoc. That's on our website, CernaSolutions.com.
Cool.
Check out CernaDoc. That's an easy way for you to automatically generate any documentation from your projects. But also, since we were having some questions about creating widgets and creating them modularly and doing it smart, check out the service portal blog on Cerna Solutions as well. We've mentioned Jeff only a few times on here, and our customers are all wondering where Jeff is. But yeah, if you go onto Service Portal and you want to learn more about creating widgets in a smart way, if you haven't already, I highly recommend it. Okay, well, let's move forward on some of these scenarios then. Let's talk a little bit more strategic about going back to box. And as you can see, this is what a brand new computer looks like. This is how we all remember receiving our computers, wrapped up nicely. Break the seal so you know that it's fresh.
So easy to ship that way too. All wrapped
Yeah,
up
it's
in
true.
one go.
It's very efficient. Absolutely.
Nothing could possibly go wrong, right? That's my second Simpsons joke.
I know. What's happening? Why?
So here, everyone, just so that you know what this is, we are going to give this to you in an email when we send out the recording to everybody. And if you don't get that, it will be on our website early next week as a downloadable file. If you want to have this cheat sheet for yourself in terms of what are some strategies for going back to box, but also what are some ways to develop smarter and customize smarter. And so that's what we want to go through right now. And this isn't really designed for me to read through word for word. We'll save that for the webinars. But this being a podcast, I do want to just kind of run through quickly what we're talking about here. And team, if you feel the need to interject, obviously, please, anytime, please speak up and let me know your thoughts. But the first thing is to get prepared, right? We talked about how important that is and to start clean. And for a lot of people, what that means is knowing what the newest out-of-the-box version of ServiceNow has to offer. If you made customizations back in Helsinki and now you're saying it's London, I want to go back to out-of-box, you need to know what that means in many ways. And one of the best ways for you to do that is to get a developer instance. So it's something that's out of the box ready, something that's fresh and clean for you to use, as opposed to working on an instance that may have been tainted in some way or customized in some way, not tainted, but you know what I mean, that's not purely the out of box instance that you're hoping to compare it to.
Sure.
Sorry, did someone say something?
Go ahead.
No, okay. And then the next step is to talk to the stakeholders. If you can, talk to the people that were involved in the initial customization in the first place. And Tanner, I know we didn't practice this. You had written that down to talk to the initial people for the customization. Why did you say that was important, though?
I think that's important because they know better than anyone else why they asked for it to be customized in the first place. They would be the right person to speak to when it came time to say, we're not going to do it this way anymore. We're just not. We're going to do it this other way instead. Who will that impact? What are the impacts of this? You knew what it was you asked for. You knew why you asked for it. You knew who asked you to ask for it. If we take this away, if we go back to out of the box, who is going to come knocking on our door, and what can we do to alleviate that so they don't have to?
Sure. Yeah, and that's actually something that we touch on a little bit more, is how to not just be successful, but how to make everyone perceive that you have been successful in the process at the same time, which those are two very different approaches. So there's going to be a time where you're going to be relying more so on QA than you normally are. And also it's an important, and I think we've all seen this from group projects we've all been involved with, to have someone that you do designate as the manager of the project, or the leader in some way. If you're doing it through an Agile or Scrum method, you're going to be considering this to be your Scrum master, essentially. And then we talk about how, having the right kinds of developers are very important. If you have a team that is not, they do not consider themselves skilled developers, you're going to run into problems, because there are complexities in merging the code and everything that you would need to be doing from update to update. And Will, obviously, I'm kind of flubbing through that a little bit because I don't understand that as well as you guys do. Can you go into what that means and what that looks like?
Yeah, so merging the code, I mean, it definitely becomes very complex very quickly. And the reasons for that are, firstly, you have to make sure that you don't break this product that you've built in the past, right? You don't want to break prior work. And you also want to make sure that, if you've got multiple developers working on a project, that you're not stepping on each other's toes, right? That you're doing your updates appropriately, and, that when you do merge your code, that everything comes across smoothly, and that, you can move up the stack with relative ease.
Sure.
And so, I mean, that's where, you just got to keep an eye on that kind of stuff and make sure that, you're merging it smartly, which we've used that word a number of times, but.
Yeah.
I mean, you just want to also make sure that the people that are working on it are, a little seasoned, have seen some stuff, have sort of worked through this in the past, because then they're going to be, they're going to catch on a little bit quicker. They're going to understand how these things work a little bit quicker. They're not going to freak out when something doesn't work. Hopefully, I mean, sure, I guess they could freak out. Hopefully, they won't freak out. But yeah, it's a good idea to kind of put your best guys on this.
And those are good learning opportunities too for some of those junior guys to, have a senior guy come alongside of them and
Definitely.
say, hey, really complex. This is how I would do this, and this is how I think about this problem, and how I mentally approach it, and how I use the keyboard to get it done, kind of, right, so to say.
So maybe the whole team doesn't need to be your A-level team, but you definitely need to have someone in that A-level position leading this group, making sure that it's being managed correctly.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is something that surprised me when we talked about this. That this is one of the biggest suggestions we have, is kind of teaming up, not just preparing and building the right group like we meant in point number one, but as a developer, you should be having almost, I don't want to say a buddy system, because that seems to diminish the process a little bit more. But Carrie, can you tell us a little bit more about?
No, you do need to have a buddy system. This is kind of a way, I was just thinking about this. This is kind of a way in which you can use some less seasoned developers, pair them up with people with more experience, or if you have two developers that haven't seen everything, they've each seen something, and so they can share kind of their experience when they're going through. So it's a way in which to sort of cheat. If you just have folks that haven't seen a lot, they can bounce off each other, discuss these decisions that they're making about how to do it, how to code it, and then sort of come out with a best case scenario. And so you just don't have like one guy in his corner trying to like fix everything and doing it his way, which ends up being another customization all of a sudden. And the note that I liked at the bottom there was that it ensures shared knowledge. So if you have two people building this thing, you will end up with two people who know how it works and two people who could share their knowledge. It just makes sense to have more people involved, more programming folks involved.
Well, and we talk about here how the bugs are going to be harder to find than normal.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So since you're not doing like an implementation from scratch, right? You're not just starting from out of box. You're starting with something that's already an unknown, and you have to figure out sort of where it intersects with everything else. And so if you come up with bugs after you've built your new version of it, you don't know if that was a bug that was there previously, if that's something that you introduced when you built your thing, is it working the way it's supposed to, and you just didn't understand that part of the process. So there are more complex questions that come up during when you're building something that's trying to go back to the box than would be if you were starting from scratch.
Sure.
So,
Tanner, do you have kind of more you want to add to that point?
Yeah, I really do, but not much. Carrie pretty much nailed it. I was going to talk about the bugs just for a second longer, and it's because paired programming is going to help you figure out, like she said, where it came from. But why is that important? Let's think about that for a second. Why do we care where the bug originated? We shouldn't. It's a bug. Let's fix it. But think about it. If it's a bug and it's in the core platform and you had not encountered it before because you were not using the core platform and you revert to the core platform, you don't have to fix it. That's a high ticket. You can save your own resources to fix the bugs that you did introduce, because you will, and put in a high ticket for that one. So finding out where the bug came from is very key in that.
Sure. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to starting small. And again, this is something I think that makes sense when you say it. Start small. I think everyone will agree that that's important. But what tends to happen is you kind of look at what are your key functions, and you want to hit those first. And what that can end up doing is sort of have a chain reaction to everything that was dependent on that. You didn't fix that first. You kind of need to start from the bottom there, so to speak. So what we recommend you do is, first of all, understand that it's super important, no matter what, start small. But also, this is going to improve your chances of management actually agreeing to this process. There's a lot of different factors that you need to consider when you are proposing this, and one of them is, how are your users going to feel, and the other one is, does management even want you to do this? And sometimes there's a little bit of a battle between the admin and the managers to get your system to work correctly. So being able to present your management with a smaller plan, one that they can see the immediate results of, is a great way to make sure that that plan actually moves forward. Now, we talked here about how integration testing is much easier when only testing one of these processes at a time. Again, we didn't practice this part of it. When I throw this to somebody,
why do we practice?
Well, I thought we talked about how this seems. We talked about how this seems so self-explanatory, but I actually want to go into a little bit more detail with this one. Why is that? I mean, when we talk about testing, one sub-process at a time, why is that not, I guess, common knowledge, and what happens if you don't do it that way?
Well, if you can break it up into smaller chunks, like let's say, for example, let's say your chunks, there's that word again. Let's say that you're rolling back on the change process. You've got a very customized change process and you don't want that to happen anymore. Why don't we take the assumption that you've got maybe a subflow in one of your workflows that has some complicated approval logic in it. If you're able to break that out and feed it data from outside the change process, you control the flow of data in, and you can test that subflow independently of the actual change, essentially doing unit tests on that subflow. And if all pass, then you know that you have successfully reverted that subflow, and then you can do the integration testing on that later within the broader scale of the change workflow. So you're not testing the world. You're testing, the subway in New York City, not the interstates on America, right? Let's break it down a little bit and check that one process and get it checked off and off your list.
Okay. And I just want to make a quick note. I understand that it's 1:45 right now. That was when we were planning this podcast going until we have a little bit more content that we'll try to get through as quickly as possible. But one of the reasons why this has been a little bit longer is because we're getting an influx of questions throughout from the viewers right now. One of which I want to bring up right now. Someone had brought up how the ITSM solution, the ITSM maintainers are not the ones who dictate how people work. When we talk about trying to make sure people are happy with our changes, how do you manage making those changes despite their wishes versus making them to fulfill their wishes?
So let's get some context on that. Are we saying that the people requesting the changes are not the people that are actually in charge of managing the ITSM processes? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to say is, I think it was perceived that we were saying we know what's best for the user, so we will create the process for them. And they may not like it, but they have to get used to it. And I think that I know you, that's not what you were saying, Tanner. But I want to see.
No.
He was. No, he was. He's the worst.
How do you personally, anyone in the group, how do you guys approach that subject for yourselves?
Well, I mean, bottom line is communication is key. So you need to have spoken to the people who are going to be using your process. You need to know what they need, right? And not that we know what's best, but like we are completely invested in creating a thing that gives you what you need. The end user. That's our whole job. That's why we love doing this. So, if you don't understand what it is that the people who are using this need, then you're in trouble already. So you need to talk to them about what they need. And then as you're building it, make a plan for how you're going to let them know that you're going to roll these changes out. And give them a lot of advanced warnings so that they can prepare for the day when it doesn't work the way it used to work. And now they have to learn a new process.
Well, I think that one way to describe that is in the same way that we all understand that ServiceNow cannot create a solution that is one size fits all for every company. We can't customize a solution that fits everyone's need in the company. And so I think that all we're trying to say there is when people have a concern, that there's, you have to make sure that you've planned appropriately to make sure that you know how to address that concern essentially.
Yeah.
So let's move over to Start Smart. And Tanner, I'm actually just going to throw this one to you. I know that I know that you had a lot to say before about what you meant by core process. What do you mean by Start Smart as a whole?
Sure. So let's take it back to the example of you've got a customized change process. Going back to the Start Small, number 3, and probably the more important number on this slide. You don't want to tackle that whole thing on day one for various reasons. One, it's a seemingly insurmountable number of changes that you must make to bring that back. But if you can break it up and you can target the pieces, the small pieces that are not integral to the process itself, right? So what do I mean by that? Let's look at like emails. If you send or don't send an email, or if you change the content of an email, it's not going to break the change process, right? Change will continue to function. Approvals will still go out. The process flow of the change request will still take place. So you can take little tiny things like that, break those down, and knock those out and work your way up, right? So start small, but start smart. Start with the things that aren't going to kill everything else if you do something wrong. Pull the emails off. Work your way up through those things, and then all of a sudden you're at workflow. Maybe you're at integrations. Those are the core. Those are the heart of the process that you're changing, right? You tackle those last, in my opinion. Do everything else first. Work your way through it. Do a rolling release so that your users are seeing these changes, but they're seeing them in little tiny increments, so they don't get overwhelmed or possibly angry that you're changing part of their process. I mean, they probably still will be, right? But you don't hit them all at once.
Right.
And then at the very end of that process, you tackle the heavy hitters, the workflow, the integration, the actual process changes. And if you do those last and you do them together as a unit, you can communicate them in one fell swoop to everyone that will be impacted by it with a large communication that says, hey, Monday morning, change is going to behave differently.
And you're going to love it.
Right? And you're going to like it, whether you like it or not.
Not saying that we know better than anybody else.
No.
Approaching this purely from a stability and a project management standpoint, that's the way I would do it.
Yeah. The other thing about that, sorry, I'm just going to make us go over time. Another reason to do it in the small rolling kind of releases is it increases your buy-in for the new thing that you're building, right? So with each little thing that you release, that's like a little change to somebody, and it works, like everything still works the way that needs to. you get people like feeling comfortable with the idea of that change. And then when you get to the end, if something happens to go wrong, they're not already set up feeling like, well, this change is just a mess and it's terrible and why are they doing this? They're like, well, okay, it's been working so far. Maybe, you know, I'm hoping maybe they'll have a little bit more patience for something like that.
That's great. Yeah.
Maybe at release day they won't be doing the genuflect.
Right.
Do.
Okay. Hey, I got something else I wanted to address was a question that came about our point number 3, since Tanner said it was, you know, probably the more important on this list. Do you ever see a tipping point where it makes sense to go big as opposed to start small?
That really depends on the process itself, right? So that depends on what you've built. If everything communicates with each other, if it cannot be broken apart into any chunks that can be managed independently, then you're at that tipping point. You're going to have to go forward with the whole thing.
Yep.
So it really is very situational. But in almost any scenario, I guarantee you'll be able to find at least 25% of the work that you can chip off into the smaller pieces and tackle those.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, we just wanted to talk about follow through. I think we've already kind of addressed this for the most part. You know, if you're able to prepare yourself, you're going to have an easier process throughout everything. So that follow through should be a lot easier. But you're going to get feedback from users at the same time. And, you know, guys, does it make sense to, since we put on here, you will get feedback. We know that this is inherent. It is going to happen. People are going to submit tickets for things that aren't bugs, they're features, right?
Your service desk is going to get calls.
And we've all been on both sides of this where, you know, both as the customizer to tell them, hey, this is a training issue. You guys just need to get used to it, which is not the polite way to say that. It's probably the way that gets communicated from time to time, versus someone that said, I had a process that I relied on that worked for me, and now you're asking me to change that, and I don't like it, so please fix it because I need it to go the way I knew that it should go. What is your approach for that? What is the best way for you to kind of make as many people happy as possible?
Well, this is why you have to communicate effectively, right? You have to let them know ahead of time that this is coming. You have to make sure that you communicate that to everybody who is using a part of this process, or everybody who will be affected. So make sure you think about that before you implement any of this. And then, you know, leave space for feedback, because you're going to get some feedback. I think a lot of times we want to do like one and done, and like we built a thing and here you go, and that's how it's going to be. That's not how it is. Like ServiceNow is kind of a living, breathing organism within your organization, and there are going to be changes to it constantly. And so just take that feedback and incorporate it into your next iteration, because there will be another one. You know, just prepare for the fact that this is just the first release. There will be more.
To touch on your feedback.
One point,
go ahead.
I would say one point I feel is key in that is preparing for the feedback, which will come and is very accepted. There's nothing wrong with getting the feedback.
No.
But you need to make sure that you have hands on deck to take those calls, to receive those emails, to do the research, to make sure that it's not a bug, that, you know, it's as we expect it to be. And you would really, in an ideal situation, not have the developers that are responsible for fixing the defects fielding those calls, because you want those developers focused on finding the defects, not doing the training, but finding the defects. You want to free their time up to make sure things get fixed.
So communication with your service desk is key there. You know, you need to prepare them for these calls that they're going to be getting. You need to prepare them with the process for how to log those calls. And then how you're going to pick them up on the other end, et cetera, who they can talk to if somebody's like, no, I want to speak to a manager. You know, you need to have all of that thought out. What was that, Will?
I saw you trying to start talking a few times.
Yeah.
I was just kind of just saying that, you know, Carrie was talking about communication. I just said, you know, make sure that you have the whole communication plan is, you know, is well documented. Everybody knows what's going to happen after go live. You know, just make sure that you got your ducks in a row, and that you're, you know, that you're thinking about the process from end to end, right?
Yeah.
Not just Not just, how do we develop this new cool thing, but how do we then support this new cool thing when we're done?
Sure. All right, so guys, we are about 5 minutes until the end of the hour. We did have a few more tips that we wanted to go over that were more development based, so more on the technical side of smart customization. So for right now, Tanner, I'm actually just going to throw this over to you if you want to kind of run through some of these points here and what your thoughts were for this.
Sure, of course. As you mentioned, we only have 3 minutes left. I will try to be brief. If anyone has any questions left over out of this, email, put it in the question box. We'll take care of it. So as brief as possible. Copy, don't modify. This applies to business rules, client scripts, UI policies. Workflows can be cloned. Anytime you're taking something that's out of the box, say a business rule, and you have to modify it, even just a little bit, you're changing one line of code, whatever it may be, leave that as it is. Use the insert and stay button in the context menu. So if you right click at the header, click insert and stay, so you get a new copy of that business rule, then make your changes. Don't forget to go back and deactivate the thing that you just cloned, right? You still have to modify it, but if you can modify it only by deactivating it, it's a lot easier when you're going back to upgrade to say, oh, what did I change about that business rule? Oh, I just turned it off. Accept it. Accept the upgrade. Cleared. Go ahead. As opposed to having to bring in the code and say, what did I change? Holy cow. So try to keep your changes, at the checkbox level for those. Script includes are obviously extensible, and I'm sure that a lot of developers on the call are aware of that. So you can take an out-of-the-box script include, create a new script include, and tell it to extend the other script include. And you guys can't see my hand motions, but I'm making hand gestures left and right.
Extend.
So yeah. So now you've got your script include, which is overriding the methods in the original, and will allow you to modify the behavior in the original without modifying the original. And that's key. One thing about that, though, don't forget, is you will have to, where you're calling that script include, you will have to call your overridden script include. So you could have, asset CI synchronizer override or something like that instead of the default script include name. Otherwise, your changes simply won't take effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing.
Now, someone asked, isn't there a danger in copying because you won't actually see what changed and you might miss an opportunity to revert? Is that what you're
Well,
going?
that's the thing. No, you will still see what changed. So when you go back to upgrade, you're going to have your version that you've done all of your work in. You're going to have the original that maybe you deactivated or something, right? If it's a business rule, it's going to flag that business rule as being modified, but you know that you didn't actually change the content of the business rule. You just turned it off. You can accept that upgrade for that business rule. You don't have to skip that upgrade, so you'll know what changed. Did I correctly answer that? Did I understand the question correctly?
Maybe it means you don't know what ServiceNow changed in that update. What has been changed in the new version for that particular
maybe
script.
They're asking about losing some of the context of what changed.
So what he said
my
is
advice
that,
for that. Go ahead.
Well, he clarified. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. That ServiceNow has said that active does not trigger the creation of a skipped update.
Well, that's even better then. That's one less thing to have to worry about at upgrade time.
Yeah.
I have hit that before. I didn't realize they had changed that. I'm pretty cautious about it now. So apologies for potentially spreading misinformation. But that's actually better for this, I think.
I'm smarter now.
Yep. Now we know. Thank you.
Was the question answered correctly though?
If not, he will. Let's see. So he said that's what I feel is a danger is you don't necessarily. Hold on one second. Cut off right there. You don't necessarily have a trigger to go and check what changed.
Mm.
Got it. Okay. My advice to that: read the release notes like crazy.
Yep.
I read them anyways. I read them whether or not I'm about to do an upgrade, period. I stay as abreast on the release notes as possible. They do pretty good documentation for the release notes. And on top of that, you can also obviously keep your PDIs, your personal development instances, at whatever version you'd like them to be at. I've got one on Kingston. I have access to one on like Jakarta or something like that. I can't remember, but you can look back through those using those as kind of your timeline to see, okay, how did this business rule change from Jakarta to Kingston? What changed?
Yeah.
So, a couple ways you can go about that. Okay, the very abstract end of this part of the demo here. What would ServiceNow do? Think about this while you're writing whatever you're customizing, right? Make it modular. Make it reusable as much as possible. Make it extensible. Have those concepts at the forefront of what you're doing while you're preparing. Don't make them an afterthought. Think about it, because if you've got one library that you've got 4 processes pulling from and using, and you've got that reusable code, and you want to modify that reusable code, you've only got one place to change it. So if you have to roll back, you've got one place to revert. It really does help a lot in the end.
Yep.
And my personal favorite, system properties. If you are customizing something and there is ever a time that your input or output might change, if there's ever a time that you have to, if you've got an odd condition that can change, from situation, from process to process, put a property out there. An example I can give you is, say you're integrating and you've got, I don't know, 2 tools, four tools. Let's say you got 4 tools, and one of them goes down. It's gone. You didn't account for it in any way. You're going to get errors. You're going to get failures. You're going to get emails. Your desk is going to get called. But if you think about it and you do a little property up there, so you've got your integration properties, and you say tool 1, 2, 3, 4 enabled, disabled, whatever it may be. If you find out that tool 1 goes down, you can turn that guy off and just check that property before you make calls to it. And if it's turned off, know that you're reverting to the manual route. Now you've avoided instance, you've avoided emails, avoided failures. The work is still getting done, right? All with the click of a switch, because you use properties. It makes it a lot easier to manage everything, and it makes it especially easier to roll back, because as you're ready to phase off those integrations while you're rolling back, you can turn them off one by one in your properties, and you can do a phased approach still.
Yeah,
so that's my very quick run through of a very large concept.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up right now. I want to thank everyone that stayed on. We obviously, as I said at the top, we had a lot of people who were interested in this topic, and it showed by everyone that joined us. And so we thank everyone for sticking around and talking with us. All the questions that came in, we answered as many as we could. If we didn't get to any, we'll try to have someone reach out to you and see if we can work with you on that. But if you guys liked this, like I said, we have a lot more of these on our YouTube channel, as well as on CernaSolutions.com. Definitely check us out on LinkedIn if you want to see more about this type of event that we're having. If you want to get news about that, that's probably the most reliable place to go and find that. Thanks to Carrie, Tanner, and Will for joining this podcast. As always, guys, it was great having a chance to spend this time with you. And everyone, have a great day. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.